the alarm blared a shrill scream that shattered the silence of the morning. I hit the snooze button, hoping for a few more minutes of peace. But it was too late. The day had already begun, and with it, the relentless cycle of consumption. I dragged myself out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a thud. I stumbled to the bathroom, my eyes still half closed, and splashed water on my face. The mirror reflected a tired, worn-out version of myself. I wasn't sure when I had last felt truly rested. Maybe it was before the endless cycle of work bills and more work had taken over my life. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, both bought from the same big box store where I had spent countless hours shopping for things I didn't really need. The clothes felt cheap and uncomfortable, but they were all I could afford on my meager salary. I grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen, a quick breakfast that I could eat on the go. I didn't have time for a real meal. There were too many things to do, too many deadlines to meet. As I walked out the door, I glanced at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. The pile seemed to grow taller every day, a constant reminder of the financial pressures that weighed me down. I had a mortgage to pay, a car loan, credit card bills, and student loans. The list was endless, and the stress was suffocating. I got into my car, a reliable but aging sedan that had seen better days. The engine roared to life, and I merged onto the highway, joining the sea of other commuters who were all heading to the same place: work. The traffic was heavy, and the air was thick with the smell of exhaust. I turned on the radio, hoping to find something to distract me from the monotony of the drive. But all I heard was the same old news: economic downturns, political scandals, and environmental disasters. It was enough to make anyone feel hopeless. I arrived at the office, a tall, imposing building that seemed to loom over the city. I swiped my badge and stepped into the elevator, my mind already racing with the tasks that awaited me. Emails to answer, reports to write, meetings to attend. The day ahead was a blur of activity, and I knew that by the time I got home, I would be too exhausted to do anything but collapse on the couch. But even as I settled into my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I was living a life that was supposed to be the American dream, but it felt more like a nightmare. I had everything I was supposed to want: a job, a car, a house, but I was miserable. The things that were supposed to bring me happiness only seemed to make me feel more empty. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, my mind wandering to a different life. What if I could break free from this cycle? What if I could live a life that was truly fulfilling? A life where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I sat there lost in thought, I realized that the first step was to question everything. Why did I need all these things? Why did I feel the need to keep up with everyone else? What did I really want from life? The day went on, a blur of meetings and deadlines, but something had shifted inside me. I started to see the world differently, to question the assumptions that had guided my life for so long. And as I left the office that evening, I knew that I was ready to make a change. I just didn't know where to start. Overconsumption has become a big problem in our society. We buy things not because we need them, but because we want them. It's like a hobby or a sport for many people. A survey found that 93% of teenage girls in the United States said their favorite activity was shopping. Most people in North America know this is a problem. A poll showed that 82% of North Americans think we consume too much. You can see the evidence in overflowing landfills and garbage cans filled to the brim. This wasn't always the case. In the past, Most households were producers and manufacturers. People grew their own food, built their own homes, and made their own clothes. They didn't buy everything they needed, but things changed. Just before the Great Depression, people were trying to create self-sufficient communities. They wanted to bring urban and rural areas together. However, the economy collapsed, and these dreams vanished. When the economy recovered, a new era began. Economists believed that the economy could grow forever if people kept buying more and more. In 1955, an economist named Victor Lebeau wrote that we need to consume things at an ever-increasing rate to keep the economy going. This idea of planned obsolescence, making things that break or go out of style quickly, became common. This shift affected our culture and even our churches. We started to measure our worth by how much money we made or how many things we owned. We moved away from values like sharing, helping others, and being good stewards of the earth. Today, shopping malls can feel like cathedrals. They have tall glass towers and lighting that makes you feel like something special is happening. More people visit malls on Sundays than churches. Our rituals of communion have been replaced by rituals of consumption. We need to ask ourselves, what do we really worship? Our identity has changed from being citizens to being consumers. We produce very little for ourselves now. We buy goods and services to try to make our lives better. But are we really happier? People often feel stressed and tired, with little time for family, friends, or the environment. Even though our standard of living has gone up, our quality of life has gone down. We have more stuff, but we're not more fulfilled. One day, a woman named Evie was reading a newspaper and saw a list that said, God, family, exercise, and work. The list was from a successful businessman who realized he was living his life backwards. His priorities were work, exercise, family, and God. He changed his life to match his priorities, spending more time with his family and on things that brought him joy. Evie realized she needed to do the same. She was a nurse and hospital administrator, always busy and focused on her career. She had a lot of material things, but she wasn't happy. She was diagnosed with a serious illness and lost her job, her possessions, and her sense of identity. In that moment, the only thing left was her faith. Evie started to question her relationship with money and material things. She remembered a Bible verse that talked about being content with what you need not, what you want. She decided to change her life and live her values. One day, her friend invited her to a seminar about money. At first, Evie didn't want to go, but she ended up learning a lot. The speaker, Joe Dominguez, talked about finding your point of enough, figuring out how much you really need to be happy. Evie realized that she had been buying things to feel better, but they never truly fulfilled her. Evie started to see that most of the things she bought were just clutter. She had too many shoes, too many clothes, and too much stuff. She began to appreciate and be grateful for what she had. She realized that every purchase was also a transaction with the earth, and she wanted to use resources wisely. Evie learned that true fulfillment comes from living her values, not from having more stuff. She started to focus on what really mattered: her relationships, her faith, and her community. She found that by living a simpler life, she was happier and more fulfilled. Losing everything was a tough journey, but it taught me something incredibly valuable. I learned what it meant to have enough. Suddenly, I wasn't chasing after more and more stuff. I wasn't caught up in the endless cycle of buying things I didn't really need. Instead, I found a new kind of freedom. I started to realize that the quality of my life wasn't about how much I had, but about how I lived. One of the biggest shifts came when I started to think about money differently. For a long time, I saw money as a way to measure my worth. It was about power, status, and how I compared to others. But then I met Joe, and he showed me a simpler way to think about it. Joe said that money is just something you trade your life energy for your time. That really hit home. When I worked for a living, I was trading my time for money. But I realized that the money I earned wasn't just about the number on my paycheck. There were other costs to consider. It took time to get ready for work, to commute, and to unwind at the end of the day. There were also expenses like work clothes, lunches, and tools I needed for my job. When I factored all of that in, my real hourly wage was much lower than I thought. This new way of thinking about money changed everything. Every time I considered buying something, I started to think about how many hours of my life it would cost. A $100 blouse wasn't just $100, it was 20 hours of my time. Was that blouse worth 20 hours of my life? I started asking myself if my purchases aligned with my values. If they didn't, I'd put the item back and feel good about myself. If they did, I'd feel fulfilled by the purchase. This wasn't about deprivation, it was about being comfortable, not satiated. I began to see that if we want to create a world that reflects values like social justice, we need to look at our own consumption. We need to be mindful of how much we have and how much we really need. The Greek philosopher Thales said, "Only if there is neither wealth nor immoderate poverty in a nation can justice be said to prevail." This idea resonated with me. Jesus never said not to have possessions. He did say that you can't serve two masters, God and money. He taught that we should treasure God, not the finite things of this world. He said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consume and where thieves do not break in and steal." This alignment between my values and my money became a cornerstone of my life. It helped me move God back to the center of everything I did. I discovered the beauty of simple living. I didn't need 70 pairs of shoes or 100 blouses. I needed a few good things that I truly loved and used. I reclaimed my time and started using it in ways that brought me joy and fulfillment, reading, walking with friends, watching sunsets, and praying. I still consume, but now I'm a conscious consumer. I think about whether my purchases are in line with my values and whether they contribute to a world that reflects love and justice. I'm committed to finding out how much is enough for me to be truly fulfilled and to helping others discover the same. By living this way, I'm not just improving my own life. I'm part of a larger movement to heal the world. Money is a powerful tool, but it's not the end goal. It's a means to live a life that honors God and serves others. When we use money as a sacrament, something that points to a deeper, more meaningful reality, we can find true freedom and purpose. We can live in a way that reflects the love and justice of God, and that makes a difference in the world. The world we live in is a place of contrasts. On one side, there are the richest people who have created a lifestyle that is all about having more and more, no matter the cost. On the other side, there are those who have almost nothing, living in poverty and struggling to meet their basic needs. Both extremes are harmful, not just to people, but to our planet too. The rich consume so much that the earth can't keep up, while the poor suffer from a lack of resources that could help them live better lives. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how much is enough? To understand this better, let's think about what the Bible tells us about justice. The Bible doesn't give us a strict definition of justice, but it shows us that God cares deeply about the poor, the oppressed, and the vulnerable. Justice in this sense means standing with those who are at the bottom, rejecting the idea that wealth or power should be worshipped, and creating a world where everyone can thrive. One day when I was 22, I decided to move to Washington, D.C. to work with a group called Samaritan Inns. I became an innkeeper, living in a house with 10 formerly homeless men. It was a challenging job. I was young, white, and from a different world compared to the men I was living with. They were older, from different backgrounds, and many had struggled with addiction. I was an authority figure, but I often felt out of place. One man in particular made me question why I was even there. He would slam the door in my face, reminding me that I didn't really belong. But something changed for me. One hot summer day, I realized that what I really wanted was to share love. I wanted to show these men that they mattered. I started to see that my efforts to be loving had been driven by a sense of duty, not genuine care. That realization was a turning point. I started over, and the relationships I built with these men were rare. They taught me about love, about community, and about the connections we have with each other, even when it seems we are worlds apart. This experience taught me about the importance of relationships, especially with those who are different from us. It also made me think about the bigger picture. The world we live in is interconnected, but our economic system often ignores this. The global economy, which we can call the big economy, treats the earth as a resource to be exploited. It doesn't see itself as part of the natural world, which we can call the great economy. In the great economy, everything is connected in a cycle where nothing is wasted. When one thing dies, it becomes food for something else. The earth is a closed system, and everything we need comes from it and returns to it. The big economy, on the other hand, is like a straight line. It takes resources, turns them into products, and then produces waste. This waste is often treated as something that can be thrown away, but there is no away. The waste ends up harming the earth and the people who live on it. Poor communities and communities of color are often the ones who suffer the most from pollution and environmental degradation. For example, toxic waste sites are more likely to be located near these communities, leading to health problems like cancer and respiratory diseases. Even something as simple as a French fry has a big impact. The potato is grown using a lot of water and chemicals, which can pollute the local environment. The potato is then frozen, transported long distances, and fried in oil. Each step in this process uses energy and resources, and the waste from these processes affects the earth and the people who live on it. So, what can we do? We can start by waking up to the reality of our consumption. We are often bombarded with advertisements that tell us we need more and more. But we can choose to resist this. We can make choices that are better for the earth and for our communities. For example, we can eat food that is grown locally, which reduces the need for long-distance transportation and supports local farmers. We can also eat less meat, which uses a lot of resources to produce. By making these choices, we can help create a more just and sustainable world. The big economy is powerful, and it might seem like our individual choices won't make a difference, but every small action counts. When we choose to live more simply and responsibly, we are voting for a world where everyone can thrive and the earth can be healthy. By living in a way that honors the great economy, we can create a future that is abundant and just for all. Imagine a world where the food you eat, the clothes you wear, and the products you use are all made close to where you live. This idea is not just about convenience. It's about creating a healthier, more sustainable community. When we use local resources, we support local farmers, businesses, and workers. This means that the money we spend stays within our community, helping it to grow and thrive. But using local resources isn't just about the economy. It's also about the environment. When we buy local, we reduce the need for long-distance transportation, which means less pollution and a smaller carbon footprint. Plus, local products often come with less packaging, which reduces waste. For example, when you buy vegetables from a local farmer's market, they might come in a reusable bag instead of a plastic container. Another important aspect of using local resources is recycling. Instead of seeing waste as a problem, we can see it as a resource. For instance, food scraps can be composted to create rich soil for growing more food. Even things like old clothes or broken electronics can be repurposed or repaired. By thinking creatively, we can turn what might be considered waste into something useful. Using local resources also helps us become more aware of the impact our choices have on our community. When we know the people who grow our food or make our clothes, we are more likely to care about their well-being and the environment. This awareness can lead to more responsible consumption. For example, if you know that the farmer who grows your apples uses organic methods, you might be more willing to pay a little extra for them, knowing that you are supporting sustainable practices. However, changing our habits isn't always easy. Sometimes, it's more convenient to drive a car than to take public transportation, even if the bus ride is longer. But if we want to create a more sustainable community, we need to make choices that are good for the environment, even if they require a bit more effort. We can also work together to advocate for changes that make sustainable choices easier, like better public transportation or more bike lanes. For example, if you live in a city where the bus system is not very efficient, you can join a community group that lobbies for better public transportation. By working together, we can create the political will to change systems that are not just. Similarly, if you want to eat more local organic food but find it hard to access, you can join or start a community garden or a food co-op. These actions not only benefit you, but also help build a stronger, more resilient community. The idea of using local resources is not just about individual choices. It's about creating a system that values community and sustainability. When we support local businesses, we are not just buying products. We are investing in the well-being of our neighbors and the health of our environment. This approach is a step toward what some call the great economy, where waste is seen as a resource, and all parts of the community, human and non-human, are valued and cared for. But to make this vision a reality, we need to move against the dominant cultural messages that tell us to consume more and faster. These messages are often reinforced by advertising and the convenience of modern life. It can be challenging to swim against this tide, but it's easier when we do it together. Building relationships with people who share our values can provide the support and encouragement we need to make sustainable choices. For many, these relationships are formed through community groups, religious organizations, or local clubs. These connections can be a source of hope and energy, reminding us that we are not alone in our efforts to create a better world. By opening ourselves to these relationships, we can see that we are all interconnected and part of a larger whole. This sense of interconnectedness is at the heart of many spiritual traditions, including Christianity, which teaches that we are all part of God's creation and that our actions have consequences for the earth and all its inhabitants. In the end, the choice to use local resources and live more sustainably is not just a personal decision, it's a call to action. It's a call to work together to create a world where all life is valued and cared for. By making small changes in our daily lives and advocating for systemic changes, we can move toward a future where the health of our communities and the planet are prioritized. This is a future worth striving for, and it starts with each of us. The economic model we use today focuses on how production grows when people specialize in specific tasks and when the market gets bigger. However, this model doesn't consider the raw materials needed for production or the waste produced. From a Christian perspective, this model only looks at human production and ignores the broader creation, which is a significant part of God's plan. This has led to local and sporadic damage in the past. But now, with the scale of human production being so large, the damage is global and catastrophic. The goal of endless growth, which is the main aim of this economic model, has encouraged the degradation of the environment. The idea of endless growth is closely tied to the concept of Homo economicus, or the economic person who is seen as someone always seeking personal gain. This view is supported by the Christian idea of human sinfulness, which suggests that people are inherently selfish. However, this is not the complete picture of human nature, according to Christian teachings. Christians believe that people are also part of communities, and that our well-being is closely tied to the health of these communities. Roman Catholic economic thinking has emphasized this point, and Christians generally believe that humans are best understood as persons in communities rather than individuals in markets. This means that participating in a healthy community is more important for human well-being than consuming more goods and services beyond what is necessary for basic health. Unfortunately, the current economic model ignores the importance of community. As a result, economic practices have been destroying human communities for a long time. This is especially evident in what were once called the Second and Third Worlds. Communists aimed to destroy traditional communities to create a rational world focused on efficient production and equal consumption. Similarly, development models for less industrialized nations saw traditional communities as obstacles to progress. For example, the idea of community-made workers reluctant to leave their families for higher wages elsewhere. Thus, development programs have often destroyed these communities. Even in the United States, the economy has been attacking communities. Factory owners are encouraged to move their capital to places where it can be more profitable. When a more profitable opportunity is found, the factory is closed, and the money is invested elsewhere. This keeps the economy growing, but it has devastating effects on the communities where the factories are located. The negative impacts of factory closings on these communities are not considered in economic equations, and thinking about them is seen as sentimental and a hindrance to economic growth. Rural America is a clear example of this. Since World War II, the application of dominant economic theory to U.S. agriculture has led to dramatically increased productivity, measured by the total product divided by hours of human labor. This was achieved through specialization and mechanization, which required more fossil fuels, chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and less human labor. Farming was reshaped according to the industrial model, and thousands of rural communities were destroyed. This resulted in mass migrations to cities and suburbs where the quality of community life is often worse than what was destroyed in the countryside. The destruction of these communities is closely linked to the degradation of the environment. Small family farms, while capable of degrading the earth, have often operated sustainably for thousands of years. In the United States, they could be reformed to be more sustainable. The Amish, for example, have shown that a better form of farming is possible, benefiting both human communities and the environment. Christians believe that the earth is God's and that degrading it is wrong. Therefore, when structuring our economic life, we should aim to meet human needs without further damaging the planet. Christians also believe that our relationships with one another are as important as our consumption of goods and services. This means that we should find ways to meet our needs that do not destroy human communities. If we are persons in communities rather than individuals in markets, the goal of the economy should be to build up communities rather than expand markets. These points may seem simple, but their implications are radical. They require Christians to help envision and implement a different economic order. If we don't, economic practices will continue to degrade the earth and destroy communities regardless of religious beliefs. One of the key issues is the scale of the economy. Bigger is not always better, and the optimal size of the human economy should be sustainable. When the economy's impact on the environment threatens its own continuation, the scale is too large. Currently, the economy is unsustainable, yet many people are extremely poor, and even the affluent are not satisfied with their level of consumption. We need to find ways to meet more needs with less environmental impact. Human ingenuity can help us achieve this. For example, we can design cars and appliances that use less energy without reducing their usefulness. We can build houses that require little energy for heating and cooling. We can grow crops organically with less use of oil-based products. These changes can reduce the pressure on the environment while still meeting human needs. Another important step is to shorten supply lines. Consider 2 ways to get tomatoes on your table. In one scenario, they are machine harvested, packaged, and shipped an average of 1,200 miles. More energy goes into packaging and shipping than into growing and harvesting, causing significant environmental stress. In the opposite scenario, you grow tomatoes in your own garden. The environmental impact is minimal, and you might even help regenerate the soil. Buying from local farmers markets or roadside stands also reduces the environmental impact by eliminating much of the packaging and transportation costs. Some of these changes are already happening, but they often require government intervention or the work of people who care deeply about the environment. Left to themselves, those following the dominant economic model are slow to adopt these changes. Shortening supply lines and promoting small family farms directly oppose the dominant economic model, which calls for greater specialization over larger regions. This makes each region dependent on trade for most of its needs, leading to longer supply lines, higher costs, and environmental damage. The sustainable alternative is for smaller regions to produce more of what they need locally. This would reduce the greenhouse effect and help the economy survive the exhaustion of oil. From a Christian perspective, this is just as important as caring for the earth. Shorter supply lines mean more economic self-reliance and stability in smaller regions. Instead of breaking up communities, the economy would encourage them. Communities would have more control over their economies, which is only possible with relatively self-sufficient economies in small regions. People in healthy communities might be less focused on increased consumption. They might choose more enjoyment at work over more goods and services. In the first world, people might be more willing to live frugally to share the earth more fairly with others. Many might find this lifestyle more satisfying, and biblical teachings about possessions might take on new meaning. These Christian teachings are simple and basic, but putting them into practice is not easy. Protestants have often emphasized a very individualistic relationship with God and neighbors, and the rest of creation has been largely ignored. This form of Christianity has often supported the dominant economic order. To change this, Protestants must overcome the separation between creation and redemption and recover a genuine doctrine of the church and human community. They must also overcome the modern dualism between humans and the rest of creation. Protestants need to build on the best in modern social teaching, which calls us to be responsible in the world. We must analyze complex situations thoroughly and find ways to move toward Christian goals. However, many in the church reject leaders who engage in such analysis, accusing them of imposing private political views. To be responsible in the global crisis, the church must commit to Christian thinking and action, informed by that thinking. We must not be swayed by attractive slogans that support the forces degrading the earth. For example, we often celebrate interdependence, affirming that we need one another and that nations need each other. Free trade seems admirable, but careful analysis shows that interdependence through free trade means dependence on those who control capital and trade terms. They act to maximize profit, and their decisions can cause significant harm to communities. In contrast, interdependence in a real human community means everyone is concerned for each other and shares in decision-making. This is the kind of interdependence and free trade that Christians can support. The global community we want is a community of free peoples, not a world subordinated to a few transnational corporations. The world we live in is a place of great contrasts. On one side, there are people who have more than they could ever need. And on the other, there are those who struggle to meet their basic needs. This chapter explores the question of how much is enough, especially in a world where consumption has become a central part of our lives. In the years following World War II, the United States saw a boom in wealth and consumer goods. Victor Lebow, a retail analyst, once said that our economy depends on us making consumption a way of life. He believed that we should find our happiness and self-worth in buying and using things, and to some extent, that's what we've done. Since 1950, Americans have used 60% more energy, traveled more than twice as much by car, and used 20 times more plastic. It's a trend that has spread around the world. We live in a time where the average person is much wealthier than their ancestors. American children, for example, have more pocket money than the poorest 300 million people in the world. But all this wealth hasn't made us happier. Surveys show that Americans are no more satisfied with their lives now than they were in 1957. Despite the huge increase in consumption, it seems that the more we have, the more we want. The problem with overconsumption isn't just about personal happiness. It's also about the environment. The richest billion people on Earth are responsible for more than half of the greenhouse gases that are warming the planet and almost 90% of the chemicals that are destroying the ozone layer. This lifestyle is not just unsustainable, it's dangerous. But poverty isn't the solution either. Poor people often have to destroy their environment just to survive. They cut down forests for farmland and overgraze land until it turns to desert. So, if both extreme wealth and extreme poverty are bad for the environment, we need to ask, how much is enough? The answer isn't simple, but it's clear that we need to find a balance. We need to figure out what level of consumption can be sustained without destroying the planet. This isn't just about using better technology. It's also about changing our values. For example, in transportation, there are huge differences in how people get around. About 1 billion people walk almost everywhere, and they often don't travel far from home. Another 3 billion people use buses and bicycles, which are cheap, efficient, and good for their health. Only about 8% of the world's population owns cars, and these people are responsible for a lot of pollution and urban sprawl. The car culture has changed how cities are designed, making it harder for people to live without a car. When it comes to food, the differences are just as stark. The world's poorest 630 million people don't get enough calories to be healthy. The middle class, about 3.4 billion people, eats a mostly plant-based diet that is actually the healthiest. At the top, there are 1.25 billion people who eat a lot of meat and fat. This diet is not only bad for their health, but also bad for the environment. Producing meat requires a lot of resources, and it contributes to soil erosion, water pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Even the way we drink is a problem. The poorest people often have to drink contaminated water, while the richest drink a lot of bottled water and soft drinks. These beverages come in single-use containers that are bad for the environment and require a lot of energy to transport. The key to a sustainable future is finding a balance. We need to use technology to reduce the impact of our consumption, but we also need to change our values. We need to focus on what really matters, like community health and the well-being of the planet, rather than just accumulating more stuff. It's a big challenge, but it's one we must face if we want to create a world that can support all of us. As we wrap up this journey through the complex world of consumption and sustainability, it's clear that the path forward isn't easy. But it's also clear that the choices we make every day can have a big impact, not just on our own lives, but on the world around us. In places where tap water is the cleanest, people are drinking less of it. Instead, they're opting for sodas and bottled water, even though tap water is right there in the kitchen. It's a bit strange, isn't it? In the United States, for example, people drink more soda than water. And the numbers are pretty staggering. In 1989, the average American drank 47 gallons of soda, which is almost 7 times the global average. That's a lot of soda. But it's not just about what we drink, it's about how we live. In many rural areas, people rely on what they can find around them: grains, fuel wood, and fodder for their animals. These resources are renewable, but often, people are forced to live in areas where the land can't support them. This means they don't always get what they need, and they miss out on things like radios, refrigerators, and other tools that could make their lives easier. In the middle of the spectrum, there are people who use materials in a balanced way. They use about 100 to 350 pounds of steel per person each year and consume between 20 and 50 gigajoules of energy. But at the top, in the throwaway class, people use materials like there's no tomorrow. They use 15 times more paper, 10 times more steel, and 12 times more fuel than people in developing countries. In the United States, this means each person uses their own weight in basic materials every day. In this throwaway culture, packaging is a big deal. It's not just about protecting the product, it's about marketing. But all that packaging ends up in the trash. In the US, 7% of consumer spending goes to packaging, and it all ends up in landfills. Disposable items are everywhere, from single-use cameras to diapers and aluminum cans. Even things that are supposed to be durable, like appliances, aren't built to last. Manufacturers focus on making them cheap, not on making them easy to repair. This means that when something breaks, it's often cheaper to buy a new one than to fix the old one. This trend of planned obsolescence is a big problem. But it's not all bad news. There are movements that encourage a simpler, more sustainable lifestyle. People like Henry David Thoreau and Wendell Berry have written about the importance of living with less and finding joy in the simple things. They remind us that a rich life isn't about having more stuff. It's about having more time, more connections, and more meaning. Living sustainably means making choices that don't just benefit us in the short term, but also protect the planet for future generations. It means using resources wisely, supporting local communities, and finding ways to live that are both fulfilling and responsible. So what can we do? We can start by being more mindful of what we consume. We can choose to buy fewer disposable items, support local businesses, and repair things instead of throwing them away. We can also advocate for policies that promote sustainability, like better land use and more efficient energy systems. It's a big challenge, but it's one we can face together. By making small changes in our daily lives, we can create a world that is more sustainable, more just, and more beautiful. It's a journey, and it starts with each of us.